Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is Gordon Chang. He's a China expert and the author of The Coming Collapse of China. You can find him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. We want to get his analysis of the impact China's disinformation about the coronavirus has had on efforts to fight it in the United States and elsewhere, what the right policy position is towards China right now, and what our long-term response ought to be to this apparent deception. And Gordon, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Greg.
Well, China denied, first of all, that this could be transmitted from human to human, seems to have lied egregiously about its own death toll based on at least anecdotal, if not more evidence. They tried to blame the U.S. military for planting it in China, and now they claim, of course, that they don't have any more new cases. So is there any doubt China lied and did so quite deliberately?
Oh, China lied at many times during this epidemic, and it's continuing to do so. So, for instance, China did not admit that there were human-to-human transmissions of the coronavirus until January 21st. But doctors in Wuhan, probably second week in December, knew that there was not only a new disease, but it was transferred person to person. So there was a long period of time when Beijing knew about this and actually had deceived the World Health Organization, which on January 14th put out a now infamous tweet saying, no human-to-human transmissions. This is important, Greg, because when people heard this, I think that other countries didn't take the necessary precautions that they should have, or at least as fast as they should have. And that meant that there are many more infections and deaths than otherwise should have been.
What do they gain by lying, especially this egregiously? Is it just for the sake of keeping their own people in the dark, or something more than that?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, the Communist Party was born of secrecy, so it is ruled in a secretive manner. And I think that it took a long time for leaders in Beijing to figure out how to deal with this. And while they dealt with it, they just allowed this virus to spread, first of all, around China, and then it left China. But there's something more here, and it's more malign, because we know that China tried to make sure that countries did not impose travel restrictions on people from China. And the Chinese leaders knew that this was, first of all, crippling China, and that there were these human-to-human transmissions. And so you put all this together and you have to say, well, of course, we don't know what was in the head of Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, but we can say that if he wanted to spread this virus to other societies so that they would also be crippled, he would have done exactly what he, in fact, did. So we've got to be very concerned about what China's been doing recently.
It's not just China's lies, though. It's the people that refuse to confront them. And I'm thinking especially of the World Health Organization, which takes their statistics at face value. And you even had one official recently in an interview refusing to even acknowledge the existence of Taiwan during some questioning. So what influence is China having on how the rest of the world is viewing their lack of cooperation and honesty in all this?
I think that you can see that countries around the world understand that China has just lied to the world. And indeed, that has caused a lot of national leaderships to view China in a very different light. Now, Beijing can intimidate other countries. They can buy off other countries. But nonetheless, I think that the reputation of China's reputation has really taken a big hit because of what is really obvious right now. Just Beijing's complete irresponsibility in dealing with this virus.
Gordon, you've said you don't believe the Chinese deliberately released the virus, but if that's true, and there's no reason to think right now that that's not true, what does it tell us about China's level of competence and its poor handling of the outbreak? I mean, leading up to this, we keep hearing about how China's about to surpass the United States in all these areas. They're the aggressor, the one with the grand world vision, yet they seem completely flat-footed here.
Well, they certainly do. We don't know where this virus started. Many people say that it started from a wet market in Wuhan. And there's a lot of science to support that. But there's also some science which is inconsistent with that theory. And that leaves open the possibility that this was an accidental release from a P4 biosafety lab near Wuhan, 20 miles south of that wet market. And the one thing we do know, Greg, is that Beijing has done its best to prevent the foreign community from studying the outbreak with the epidemiologists and the virologists going on site. They were there for like half a day in Wuhan. There was a World Health Organization team. But half a day is hardly sufficient in order to do the investigation that's necessary to figure out how this virus started. So we've got to be concerned that Beijing's trying to hide something. And when they try to hide something, we got to ask, what is it?
Just a couple more questions for Gordon G. Chang. The book is The Coming Collapse of China. You can find him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. And Gordon, recently the president went onto Twitter to talk about his conversation with Xi Jinping, used very flattering language. Is that the right play in the short term, given that we've got to have some cooperation until this has passed us? Or is it a bad move because it validates China's position in the world when we know what they've just done?
Yeah, I would not have used such flowery language. President Trump has done this quite a lot. But also we got to remember that this is the way that American presidents for decades have treated their Chinese counterparts. And I actually don't think that Xi Jinping likes this because he knows that President Trump has adopted policies that impose great costs on China. And he probably thinks that Trump is not being sincere. The one thing about Chinese leaders, they can deal with hostile counterparts, but they like predictability. And the one thing that Trump is not is predictable. So I wouldn't, if I were president of the United States, use that type of language because I think that it undercuts our foreign policy in important ways. But nonetheless, the Chinese leaders probably are pulling their hair out over that as well.
Gordon, two-part question to close. What should be our posture towards China right now in the midst of this ongoing crisis? And what should be our long-term posture once this is behind us?
Well, in the short term, we've got to figure out what's going on. We don't really know because of China's attempts to suppress information, which have actually been quite effective, which means I think that we need to maintain the travel restrictions and quarantines on China. I'd be cutting off commerce for the most part, largely because this virus stays on inanimate surfaces for perhaps as much as 17 days, as our CDC has said. Until we figure it out, I think we need to protect ourselves. Long term, I just don't see that we have much of a future with China's communist rulers because they've shown hostility and belligerence toward us. They've been using inflammatory language about the United States, that we actually spread the virus, U.S. Army spread the virus to Wuhan. This is dangerous language. We've got to deter China, and that's both short term and long term.
Gordon, a lot more questions, I'm sure, to come in the weeks ahead. For the moment, of course, everyone focusing on actually getting through the virus. Thanks very much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much, Greg.
Gordon Chang, China expert, author of The Coming Collapse of China. You can find him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.